I'm sure you've heard about CipherTrace and what they claim they can do. Now, let me just explain how they work in regards to Monero and how that affects you. First of all, what CipherTrace cannot do is de-anonymize a user on-chain, e.g. And de-anonymizing the decoys. So given the 10 mixin, 11 total ring size, including your transaction, one cannot de-anonymize that. They cannot. However, they can, with a certain degree of probability, guess which the most likely output you own, or the output that you've created for your transaction within the decoys. And all of that is done off-chain. So they don't have a specific absolute way to de-anonymize your transaction within Monero. All they can do is partner up with third-party users, institutions, firms that are also running full Monero nodes, that are receiving transactions from users, and that might have KYC. Now, given that assumption, if you partner with somebody who has a specific node or a specific wallet that they merge all the users' account balances in, you can perhaps get somebody's ID if there is KYC enabled on that platform, or IP address and transaction behavior. So if you detect a specific behavior with a certain IP address and a specific privacy coin, you can, using the non-privacy chains that they have already interacted with the exchange, to de-anonymize that user. So there is a lot of trust-enabled application here with CipherTrace, and the claim that they can de-anonymize a Monero user is not true at all. All they can do is guess with probability which transaction came from where, given your previous behaviors, with a certain set of third-party contributors. Okay, so if you are, for example, sending one Monero to Coinbase, now obviously you have KYC by default enabled on Coinbase if you want to do a certain amount of transactions, withdrawals, or deposits. You will be de-anonymized easily. But let's say there is an exchange that doesn't require KYC, but you have dealt with other chains on there. They can easily read your patterns, see where the Bitcoin you've withdrawn to gone to where, which IP, and maybe that Bitcoin has been sent to another exchange that does enforce KYC. They can easily get the data from there, verify that that is you, and given your Monero transaction, they have probably guessed with high certainty that your the Monero or that transaction is outputted by you, and therefore you own that Monero or have withdrawn or submitted that Monero. Now, that is as far as they can go. They cannot de-anonymize Monero on-chain. Everything has been working on off-chain with a large varying degree of probability. So what does this mean for you? If you are using Monero and if you're transacting from your local wallet, hardware wallet, paper wallet, whatever it is, if you are submitting these transactions from yourself to somebody who is not involved in this third-party collaboration, for example, exchanges, whatnot, you're absolutely fine. If you're submitting this to your friend, a family member, an organization you know that is not participating in this triangle, then you should be fine. And you just carry on using Monero as it should be. No worry on your anonymity being broken, because there is no way to do that. And speaking of that, speaking of decoys, actually, why don't we just remind ourselves that there is a work in progress at the moment, something called Triptych. So what Triptych does, and this is very important, it allows the Monero chain to reduce the size of the transactions given the input of decoys. So what we have now currently with the ring signatures is a set of decoys. So you have your transaction and 10 other decoys given a ring size of 11. The size of the transaction increases linearly, I believe, with each decoy. So let's say, for example, each decoy holds a weight of 1 kilobyte. If you have 10 decoys, your transaction size will be a minimum of 10 kilobytes, given an extra 1 kilobyte for your transaction and other metadata. Now that is a 1-to-1 ratio essentially. If you are using, for example, 300 decoys, the assumption that one decoy is holding a weight of 1 kilobyte. If you have 300 decoys, you'll have a minimum of 300 kilobytes per transaction, a 1-to-1 ratio. Now what Triptych does is, in summary, allow a Monero user, if implemented in the future, will allow a Monero user to perhaps use a larger decoy set. Instead of 10, one could use maybe 55 or 100 decoys. And that is not a 1-to-1 ratio, but that is increasing logarithmic. So there is a certain percent that is attributed to the size. So, for example, the previous assumption was that one decoy holds a weight of 1 kilobyte. In this new implementation, this linear implementation of Triptych, one can assume that one decoy holds a size of 0.11 kilobyte. So that's about 80 or so, 89% less, approximately. So now we've reduced the size by approximately 90%, 0.11 kilobyte, all right? And then as soon as you start adding more decoys, you're increasing the size of a 1-to-10 ratio. So that is much more efficient already. Now what this also means is that as you keep on increasing the decoy size, the percentage or the absolute increase will get reduced over time. So over time, the 0.11 kilobyte will turn into 0.1 kilobyte and then into 0.09 kilobyte. Example, all right? So what this means is that a Monero user could possibly use a larger decoy set without affecting the transaction size and the transaction cost. And what this means is that we will absolutely guarantee that Monero will become more difficult to trace, and it will make firms like CipherTrace really only rely on third parties to help de-anonymize. I mean, there is, you know, for a core Monero user that has been around, they know that CipherTrace is not a threat at all. It's not a threat now and will not be a threat in the future. And if Triptych does get implemented, then you can be sure that you have a higher percentage confidence in knowing that Monero will protect you and stop you from any actor trying to de-anonymize your transaction, your identity, etc., and so forth. Now the only thing left would be your IP address, but I believe Covery is being implemented and tested, etc., which essentially will allow you to run a Tor node locally, or the Monero node would load the Tor network locally on your daemon, and you can then submit transactions over that network or I2P. So essentially you're also playing the decoy game with your IP address. So yeah, it's very interesting. And yes, just bear in mind that CipherTrace does not hold a major threat. The only thing that you should be aware of is that they are working with third-party firms that are collaborating on KYC data and previous blockchain transactions on the open chain to guess with a certain degree of probability who you are and what you're doing, essentially. And I hope that you find this useful.